Good morning and welcome to our third State of the Market for UK property lawyers. Today is a slightly different day on this beautiful Yorkshire morning. And today, instead of rather looking at the statistics like we do at the beginning of the month, we are going to be interviewing one of the conveyancing industry's leading lights in the rather wonderful Sarah Keegan. I'll introduce Sarah in a moment, but the idea about today is to address some of the more contentious issues that are affecting law firms and the conveyancing industry in particular. And we'll be running these sessions once a month in the middle of the month. So if you want to put them in your diary, middle Wednesday of the month is when we will be interviewing all sorts of people moving forward. And then at the beginning of the month, we'll be looking at the stats from 20EA. So without further ado, let me introduce my esteemed colleague, Miss Sarah Keegan, who has, I understand, been in this industry for more than 20 years. Not quite as long as me, because she hasn't got as much grey hair as me, of course. But Sarah is a solicitor, non-practicing, and I will hand over to her so she can tell you all about what she does for law firms and how she's helping. Sarah.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm really going to enjoy this because it's a fascinating subject for sure that we're about to talk about today. I am a co-founder of the CS Partnership. I qualified in 1996, so it's a little bit more than 20 years, but thank you for being kind. And what we do is help law firms modernise the way that they deliver their services. And because I was, and still am in my heart, a property lawyer, and I ran one of the biggest departments in the country. I also am a co-author of a book called Flat Schemes in Residential Developments. I was a residential and mixed-use development lawyer for my sins, historically. And because of all that, we streamlined and we looked at and had the experience of being able to look at many, many transactions. At one point, we were submitting 4,000 transactions a month to the Land Registry. And that meant that a lot of things went wrong, as you probably can gather from time to time. Things went wrong, which meant that we were reverse engineering, my co-founder and I, what was going wrong, and then process mapping what we could do differently to make sure it didn't happen again. We didn't use those words then, Richard, but we do
Process
now.
mapping. We'll come to a bit of process mapping.
Process mapping.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking at problems and trying to work out how to do them better is what we started off doing in practice. We jumped out 12 years ago to set up the CS Partnership. So that's what we do.
And very successfully as well, with lots of clients all over the country.
Yeah,
Very
happily,
good.
yes.
So today, we are going to look at one of the big problems affecting the conveyancing industry that seems to have just set the whole world on fire. And of course, that big problem is, it must be the war in Ukraine, isn't it? That's going to be affecting...
It's not that. No, it's not that.
No, it's not the war in Ukraine. No. So it must be the war in the Middle East that's obviously going to affect oil prices and going to cause inflation. Is it that?
No, it's not that either.
Really? Really? Oh, I know what it must be. It must be Mr. Trump and his trial in America, because that's obviously going to affect the way the world is, and we might have, I don't know, World War III afterwards. No? Is that what it is?
No, it's not. It's not that either. No.
It's not that. Wow, I'm really struggling to think. Oh, silly me. Right, of course. It's the fact that Arsenal and Manchester City both lost in the Champions League last night, and therefore the Mark Hemmings and Harry Hemmings, they're pretty upset, and Nigel Taylor and Emmett, he's pretty upset. So that's what it must be, is it?
No, and nor is it about Rangers and Celtic, because my dad's on a knife edge about that too. No, it's none of those supremely global important things. No, it's not.
Oh, okay. So, I've got it. It's about a Labour politician not filling her forms in when doing her conveyancing properly. That's what it's about, isn't it?
No, although we could do half an hour on that one day, but no.
No, okay. So it's about a form though, yeah?
It is about a form, yes, it is about the form.
So all these worldwide things, and we're going to be talking about a form?
Yes.
Okay. Right, well, this is obviously important, so let's get into it, because it seems to have broken Twitter and broken LinkedIn, and everybody seems to be talking about the TA6. Oh, my word. Okay, so Sarah, tell me what a TA6 is.
A TA6 and also the TA7 are the forms that are used in a conveyancing transaction to get the seller to tell the buyer exactly what's going on with their property. So back in the day, we used to call them property information forms, but basically it's the owner of a house saying, this is what I know to be true about my house that you are going to be buying from me. That's what it is.
Oh, okay. Right. And there's a little bit of a backstory here, isn't there? And if I will just recap where we've got to, before we get to, and without being flippant about these things, it is obviously affecting law firms up and down and has the potential to have a major change to the conveyancing process. So without being too dramatic about it, it could change the whole way we do these things. But let's just look a little bit at the way. Now, back in November, and let me click onto this slide here, our friends at National Trading Standards released this guidance, material information in property listings. Admittedly, this was aimed at guidance, as it says here, in November 2023 for estate agents. But it was widely publicised at the time. You couldn't pick up you couldn't go on Property Industry Eye or The Negotiator, any of the trade, even the Conveyancing Today and all the other worthwhile publications that conveyancing lawyers should be looking at. It was fairly widely trailed that material information was a big deal. And even prior to that, the Home Buying and Selling Group, whose members include the Conveyancing Association, Bold Legal, the Law Society, I believe, and some lenders and the estate agency groups, all coming together, were widely publicising that upfront information and material information were pretty important and needed to change in the industry. That was your understanding as well, yes, Sarah? So,
absolutely,
and we're going back. And I think if we scroll down some of this guidance, I think in his foreword, James Monroe, and just let me make this a little bit bigger so people can see, he references here, since the introduction of the CPR legislation, unfair contract trading, in 2008, all businesses in the UK have been under a legal duty not to omit or hide information which is material to a consumer's decision. So this is legislation that's on the books, and what he's saying here is in this foreword is that all he's doing is clarifying the legislation. It says material information is not a new concept. This guidance is based on existing legislation, and getting the estate agents, who are regulated at the moment, much to everyone's dismay really, but to commit to doing so is what is required. And do you know what? It's a good thing, isn't it, Sarah? Isn't it a bit like buying a car that you don't know what's going on with it?
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, we're going to come back a couple of times, I hope, in this chat about the fact that this is all for the benefit of the end user. I always call them the end user because, of course, our clients are law firms. So we're talking about our clients' clients.
But the real customer, the consumer, the home mover.
The home mover, the home seller, the home buyer, that we're looking after humans. We're looking after people. That's what we're supposed to be doing.
Yes. I mean, if you're buying buying a house, which is the biggest transaction you'll ever do, you should have as much information as possible to base your decision on. That's the basic 100%. Concept.
Yeah. Especially and this is going to be a little bit, I might be showing my age here, but especially in a modern time as we are, where everything is fast like this, we need to make sure that people don't just fall in love with where they're going to be putting their Christmas tree and what their Instagram pictures are going to look like. We actually need to be, it's true though, isn't it? It's a little bit, get me a house, that's fine. But we also need to make sure they understand what they're buying, because like you say, it's a massive deal. It's a big purchase.
This is a narrative that people like Kate Fortner and Beth Rudolph and the others at the Conveyancing Association and the Home Buying and Selling Group have been trying to promote for a long time, for better or for worse, and what's happened now is it's been brought to the forefront. So this isn't new. This was my point. And if you look down what the material information was supposed to bring forward, and remember this was published in November, all the questions on here, whether it be council tax, price, tenure, freehold, were highlighted as what estate agents should be gathering. Now, because there's no regulation, some agents were already doing this under what they called a CPR form. Many have used a PIQ form or their own version. And it was also broken down into these three sections, which have been mirrored. Material information in Part A, physical characteristics of the property in Part B, and material information relating to things like building safety restrictions, floods, etc. in Part C.
Yeah.
So that's what came out in November. And then, if I tab to my next one, Property Mark, formerly known as the National Association of Estate Agents, launched this form, which will look remarkably familiar to some people, in end of January, I believe. I've just got to get the right dates on this. I think it was the end of January. Let's have a look somewhere on here. No, it's not saying tonight. It was the end of January this year, so 3 months ago. They came out with this and they said, getting your property market ready, this information which you provide must be accurate. And you'll see, just reading that, you will see this replicated further down. Here at Part 2, additional information required for the conveyancing process. And they go on to say within this form...
Above that, sorry to really interrupt there. Sorry,
Absolutely.
I just got really excited about, you see that paragraph in bold above the green?
Yeah, instructing.
Instructing your conveyancer now will mean they can review the information you have provided. I think that's really important.
I
We'll come back to
completely
that
agree
later.
with you. So, instructing you. So this is the estate agents and their regulatory body saying, get your conveyancers instructed when the houses go on the market. And I think that's a message that's been repeated time and time again. And has anyone ever said that not doing so is a bad thing? Everyone thinks it's a good thing, don't they, to get your conveyancers instructed? And and our audience today is mainly conveyancers, wouldn't you want to be engaged a little bit earlier in this process
Well, I'm going to
than you
take that
currently
question
do?
a little bit further forward and say, haven't our legal industry been asking to be instructed earlier for a long time, and not to be the last person on the list?
I think that's one of the gripes of many law firms out there, that law firms are a little bit low down the food chain in these regards. You know, the house goes on the market and the estate agent does all these things, and it's not until much later in the process, when it goes SSTC, the lawyers become involved, and that's often too late. They've lost the advantage at that moment in time.
Exactly.
And so, just going through the history here, here's this form, which I'm not going to go through the whole form at this bit, but you can see pretty much it covers all the things that wouldn't traditionally have been covered in the version 4 of the TA6. Boundaries, legal ownership, guarantees, occupiers, all sorts. And this is what it looks like. Then, our friends at the Law Society launched this little baby. And if you haven't seen this yet, here we go. Okay. Just 2 weeks ago. Okay. And they launched this to the form providers like Minerva, who can produce this digitally so that lawyers can send it to estate agents, or agents can use this on day one when the house goes on the market and get the clients to fill it in. Everyone would think, well, not such a big deal really, but here we go. And if you look at the guidance note, I mean, we'll just have a quick look at some of these first few pages, Sarah. First page, while it's a whole page, it's really only asking for your name. You know, first name, second name, last name. Okay. Second page, and really, importantly, if you're a company, and the address of the property. So 2 pages to get your name and the address of the property. Not such a big problem, really. Third page, couldn't be any clearer, could it? The Law Society saying to the vendors, when they put the house on the market, who is
Go and get your solicitor
or your conveyancer. Okay? So I would have thought that most lawyers would like this, because we are then putting, and I think this is the Law Society's underlying raison d'etre in these, that they're trying to get the solicitors engaged at a much earlier stage so that they can take control of the process. I don't think that's a bad thing, particularly. I mean, I get that there are some other arguments out there why this needs to be looked at, but fundamentally, getting the lawyers instructed is what the Law Society are asking by putting that question where they put it there, right at the beginning, making the clients think about it. Then we've got 3 or 4 pages of notes explaining to the seller that he has to do this accurately, and so on. And no different to the original TA6 notes, instructions to the buyer on how to do it, a whole load of definitions. So this is definitions, it's just blurb really, but it's not part of the form. And then we're now on page, what are we on? 6 of 32. Just bear with me here a second. And you can see this huge, great font. My point I'm trying to make is, some people say, who would want to fill in a 32-page form? Well, it isn't, is it? It's not a 32-page form. I'm up to page 6 and all I've done is fill in my name and address. Now I'm being asked for another page, council tax band, asking price, and is it freehold or leasehold? There's not many common hold. I think we're about 0.1% of properties that are common hold.
I know.
Okay, so actually, not a lot of questions there. If your property isn't leasehold, which is 75% of properties in the country. If you watch our show on the beginning of the month, you'll know that there's only 24% of properties are leasehold, so the vast majority aren't. I get that if it is, you may need a little bit of assistance with these. Why the question is, what's the end date? No one knows the end date. They might know the start date. The end date, you've got to work that out. That's a tough one. That might need some tweaking. We'll come back to that. So all that goes, service charge stuff goes, common hold stuff goes, so you don't need those. And then and other charges. You may need some assistance with this, of course. And then you're down into the area where you may need, if the client going through this questionnaire may need some assistance, we would say, yeah?
Yeah, I think so. And actually you might need, there are 25% of those properties that are leasehold.
Yes.
You've just said they will need some help as well, probably, very likely. Well,
yes.
I actually filled the form in, as you know, for my own house as if I was selling it. And I thought some of these questions were quite difficult if I wasn't a property lawyer. So yeah. I think they would want some help with that, yes.
Just to get to the crux though, if I come down to here, these are the really tough questions for a lay client to fill in about restrictions and building safety and listed buildings and restrictive covenants. But then once we get to, where is it? Flood risk, I'm just going about, are we past this? Building works and approvals. There is quite a lot here. Right, so to there, so page 18, okay, part 2 is not meant for the estate agent. Part 2 is then meant for the law firms. This is the legal bit. So actually the estate agents are interested in that first 18 pages, of which quite a lot are explanatory notes, and when we do these digitally, of course, if it does say leasehold, it gets rid of a few. So it's going to, digitally, this looks a whole different ballgame to a printed out form, is what I'm trying to say. So we've gone from trading standards, back here, if we go back, remember this, announcing this in November, sorry. Our friends at Property Mart are producing this great form, which is pretty identical actually, in February, to the Law Society, falling into line in March and giving everybody 3 months, because this doesn't have to be used until the 25th of June at the latest, by the way, you can use it before, to that point. So from that perspective, all fine. Right, Sarah, I'm going to hand this over to you now because you've done some process maps, haven't you?
Yeah, as I would. To me, I
will let you talk about these.
Yeah, so there's a lot of emotion in the industry at the moment about this change, and we'll come on to the change later as we go through this chat. And I understand it. I'm not saying for 1 second I don't understand it. I do get it. But what I thought was, as we always do, well, what are the actual facts and what does the flow look like for what is the change we're talking about as opposed to just a form? Because it's not just a form. It is important, Richard.
I know.
It's not just a form. So in the pre-process, which I've actually headed up pre-25th June 2024, which is the date that we're going to have to use them by the latest, as you said. You place your house on the market. The sale is agreed. The law firm, when they're instructed, sends their TA6 to the client. The client completes the TA6 and returns that to the law firm, and the law firm sends that to the buyer's law firm with the rest of the contract pack, with the information it would send out in the first place.
And that's been the way of things for as long as I've been, 30 years at least, hasn't it?
Well, at least 27 years for, as far as I'm concerned, and possibly long before that. Since the 80s, I would probably say it's been there for a long time.
And and therefore, if we look at from an outsider's point of view, not somebody within the industry, the biggest problem that outsiders come up with about conveyancing when they have to go through it is that A, the process takes too long, and B, there's a lack of communication and understanding of what's going on. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and I think some of them would also say that they are having to repeat information to different bodies, different people in the transactions
Quite right.
as well.
And for the lawyers who don't get this, there are many estate agents out there who've done this correctly, filled in that CPR form, as some called it. Some called it a PIQ. And the clients have filled this in on day one when they put the house on the market. And then when the lawyers send out their TA6, they're doing it all again. And they're saying, well, I've done this once. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And that's because we've had no joined up thinking.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what the law
that is one of the biggest problems in the whole market, isn't it? That there's no joined up thinking.
Yeah. So
I'm not talking about individuals. I'm not meaning that. I mean the bodies that control us, the trading standards, the SRA, the Law Society, whoever, the CLC. There's no sitting down between those industry bodies and saying, okay, what do we want everybody to achieve? That's the problem.
Or it would appear that way, because it would appear now
that's how it ends up being.
Yeah. Now we've got the Law Society sitting down with the estate agency body, Property Mark, and trading standards, and all coming up with the same concept, or all saying, let's get the form filled in at the right time, and the same form, and this is where we are.
Same information, yeah.
So
and there's a go on, sorry. And there's also Will
it? Do you think there's a chance that by changing the form and getting it filled in up front and lawyers instructed on day one, will this improve transaction times? Because that is fundamentally better for customers, better for lawyers because it's better for cash flow, and better for estate agents. So transaction times is the killer. Will it do with that?
And by the way, it would be better for consumers as well, because we all forget that sometimes when we're having these chats. So I think the answer is yes, if it's done properly. I do.
Okay. And I think that's a message that both trading standards and others in the industry, I know the Bold Group have long been this, but if we go back, what was it, to 2009 when they introduced home information packs, and people have their own views on home information packs, and they obviously got canned in 2011. But the one thing that they definitely produced was faster transaction times. And my personal view, some may argue, and it's just a personal view, is that those faster transaction times were not about the information necessarily within the pack, but because the lawyers were instructed when the house went on the market, and that's what drove it. And this is where we're getting back to here.
Yeah, I think so. And you'll sometimes get, rightly so, from the profession, from the legal profession, people saying, well, that's not what speeds up conveyancing transaction time. It's because the land registry is too slow, or it's because of this reason, or it's because of that reason. And my answer back to them is always this: it is those things too, but we're only changing one thing at a time. We're not revolutionising the whole thing. We're evolving the process here.
So if you've watched our shows at the beginning of the month about the data, one of the key things that we've brought out of those shows is that transaction times vary from law firm to law firm quite dramatically. We've seen good law firms getting transactions through in under 100 days. Okay, but the industry average is 117 days. So that's like 20 days, 3 weeks faster than the average. But an average is just that, isn't it? If there's somebody doing it at 90 and the average is 121, we've got other firms taking 130, 140 days at the other extreme. So the difference between 90 and 130, 40 days, that's like 6 weeks.
I know.
Of course. So this is the process. You can't just blame the process. We have to blame law firms who, to different degrees, have adopted different practices, different technologies, and different processes, something you're so keen on, to make things quicker. This can help, can it not?
Yeah, it absolutely can. It also could be the start of looking at the whole way that they're undertaking their transactions,
Okay.
because it's a step change completely. So we'll come on to the next
Okay.
next
So we
process.
looked at that's the pre. That's where we were. Let's look at post, shall we? And here's what it's going to look like after June the 25th. Again, talk the people through this.
And before we get a lot of comments on post June 25th, it's possible that you have to have adopted it by date is moved slightly or
Yeah.
you know, is extended. But at the moment, we're working on the dates that we know of.
Yeah.
So, to my mind, we would put the house on the market, same step as before. At that point, based on what we've looked at in the forms, which are very clearly saying instruct your solicitor, the agent and the client would instruct a law firm. The client would complete the TA6. I know it's the TA7 too, but let's talk about the TA6. Parts 1 and probably parts 2 at that point with their lawyer's help. Do forgive me, I always say solicitor because I am one, but with their legal representative's help. The law firm, to my mind, would then send the completed TA6 only part 1 to the agent.
Correct.
Sailors agreed. Law firm then sends both parts of the TA6 in that same initial contract pack that we were talking about before. So the lawyer's much more involved, and much more. I was going to say more quickly. How bad is my English at that sentence? Much earlier involved as well
in the process, helping the customer fill in those forms. Now, I have seen comments online, and these need to be ironed out away from this debate, particularly whether how much help those lawyers should be giving the clients to fill those forms in, and whose liability is at stake at that point. I do want to mention that because I know that is the crux of the argument on LinkedIn at the moment about who's going to pick up the liability.
And I think it could really help and should really help that the Law Society would come out and look at this point for the profession and say, okay, so at the moment, the reason it is such a big deal is because we all transact properties on the premise of caveat emptor, which you've probably heard, but it basically means let the buyer beware. In other words, we're very used to saying, here is your information, here's your contract, here's the supporting documents. You do your own searches, you do your own survey on the physicality of the building, you look at everything yourselves. You ask me as the seller's solicitor you ask me to answer the inquiries. I send those to my client. The client tells me what's going on. I come back to you, and that's how we go about the process. It therefore is, and we all also work on the conveyancing protocol, and that has that set out very clearly in the structure of that too. And that's how we work. And for the firms that are CLC and legal execs, they also adopt everything we've just said as well. So that's how this profession functions. The sticky part of what is upsetting everybody is that if we come in and help earlier on, whilst it's a good thing for transaction time, a good thing for everybody to be aware of what is there, and we're going to argue later on in our chat, we'll have a chat about later on in our chat, about the fact that I'm going to suggest lawyers should get in and charge more for this. We'll talk about all of that later. Mm-hmm. So apart from all of those good things, the problem is then, if I'm the seller's solicitor and I don't have the liability of caveat emptor, it's the buyer's solicitor that has to be aware, not the seller's solicitor. Seller's solicitor has to be honest, but they don't have to be aware of it because we're not responsible for buying it. We're responsible for just passing the information over. Yes. If you change that round, then everybody's up in arms about the fact that does that make me as the seller's solicitor now liable for some things that I wasn't liable for before? And the answer is, I think from a practical perspective and a legal perspective, we were always fairly responsible for making sure that we are responsible for making sure the seller is telling everything, and that we've given over every information that we've got. And then later on in the transaction, we were responsible for ironing out glitches, for if there's no access way, for making sure we can enter a deed of easement. If there are two mortgages instead of one, for making sure that we're redeeming both of them. We pick it up later. We deal with the issues.
And as going back to the point of helping the customer, isn't it just great customer service to help a vendor when he's filling those forms in? Because not everyone's been to law school. Not
No.
everyone understands what the end date of the lease is or these things. So for the lawyer to be able to engage with the customer and help them through that questionnaire, in my world, I think that's wonderful customer service if you can deliver it. Now, and it's a process change, but it
Yeah.
surely should be something that we're aspiring to do as a legal sector to help our customers put the house on the market and be honest and declare all the things that they need to declare. Is that not right? Am I missing a point there?
It's 100% right. But you know, Richard, even when we have process maps, and we do have process maps that always include a welcome call as a client onboards with a firm,
Oh yeah.
I have had more conversations than I could possibly reference about why lawyers don't do that. They don't like doing that early on. We like as an industry behind paper, behind emails, and we're busy and it takes time, and they don't very much appreciate that going out to the client in the beginning.
I get that. So would you say, Sarah, that this process change presents a threat to lawyers or an opportunity to lawyers?
I think it presents an opportunity, and I'm really concerned that it's going to end up being a threat. Shall I explain what I mean?
Yes, please.
I think it is a real opportunity to get out there and to be instructed early. And my co-founder, for example, when I was talking to her about this, said, well, why couldn't we, meaning, you know, we always talk about it as if we're still in practice, why couldn't we charge £250 for helping with this part of the transaction to a client, and then if they re-instruct us or they come back to us to do the rest of the work, that we would possibly give them a credit or against it, or, you know, but you're not losing money by helping a client do this part of the form. And if they then chose to instruct another firm, fine, but at least you've been paid for your time in doing this properly. But I think that if we don't take that and embrace that and go and talk to the agents and say, this is what we want to do, this is how we want to do it, this is the tech we're going to use. I am going to bring Minerva into that later on. But if we don't do that, then what I think will happen is that, and it's heartbreaking for me to even think about it, is that tech companies who do not necessarily have the skill set to be able to do this well will go out and sell it for whatever it is, or sell it for £250 and only give the solicitors £30 or whatever that whole looks like.
And there are those companies exist. The reason I got into this business in the first place, back in 2003, there were some, at the time, slightly questionable organisations, one of which you used to work for, Sarah. Begins with an L and ends in an S.
I didn't work for them; they were clients.
Oh, okay, sorry. So they were clients.
You see, even now, I'm like, I did not work for them. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Okay, but others that probably you don't see anymore. There was there were panel managers, people like Live and whatever, and they are panel managers still exist, and they are out there all the time, speaking to estate agents, trying to win their business, and then sending that business, once it's won, to law firms for enormous referral fees that upset everybody, but taking out a huge chunk in the middle, and their only raison d'etre is to be middlemen that are not required. And my reason for setting LFS up was to create a situation where the lawyer and the agent could work together without a middleman. And again, this is where we're back to, isn't it? Here, where we want the lawyers to be front and centre of this argument, helping the estate agents to help their clients through the process without
that middleman. Sorry.
Yeah. Exactly. And
Yeah.
you know, I'm not going to name the names of those middlemen, but you will need to go into the estate agency press and see who are advertising directly to the estate agency market in a big way and saying, we can help you provide TA6s and other compliance services and conveyancing services at 2 and 6. We don't want them. We don't need them. This is not our process, is it?
And we're too clever for that. The problem is, I want to sort of say loudly and out there is to get the profession to come together in this, to work together to make sure we are combating that. For the first time in my career, we actually want to come together and combat that. Because there's no point being super clever and putting it all on Twitter. This doesn't work. We're not making change by that. This is a way of coming together and saying, okay, we are where we are. It is what it is. It could be a fabulous opportunity to get rid of those middlemen. What are we going to do about it?
Yes, and look, the middlemen will continue to trade and will win business, and there's a lot of business to be had out there, a lot of conveyancing work, and fine, everyone will coexist. I have no doubt in that matter. But those firms that want to grab this by the horns have an opportunity here, don't they?
Yes,
it would be my feeling.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely, because there's no point saying I'm going to redact the form and I'm going to do X and I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to comply. I'm going to ignore what the regulator says. I'm not going to ignore all of it because I don't like it. That's, to my mind, the market will come in. It's coming anyway. Those people will come in and do this anyway. And then where will you be? That's my concern for the...
Do you think that this is all going to get scrapped because there's too much noise, or do you think that too much effort's already gone into it and we're going to have to adapt to make it happen anyway?
I think the noise, I don't think it's going to get scrapped because of there's too much noise, because you just said national trading standards and the estate agents are already saying this out there. To be scrapped because there's too much noise would be too difficult for everybody. It's coming, is my opinion. And we need to that's why we sat down and said, okay, if this is coming, how are we going to help our clients deal with it? Okay.
So that brings us to the next question, and I know this is sort of really something you focus on, but this is change, isn't it? This is, and to deal with change, you've got to have change management and manage the change carefully so that you're processing that in your firm. So I know it's something you focus on. How should lawyers approach this change management generally, not just as well as TA6?
The first thing that we have to realise as individuals and leading teams is that we have a very unique personality profiles as lawyers, and of course like attracts like. So it's not just qualified people, because we're all in the same team when I'm talking about this. We have an 89% suspicion percentage quota when we're profiled. We have a 90% autonomy figure when we're profiled, and we have a 30% figure when somebody's telling us that we've done something wrong. We don't like to be told that we've done that anything that we do is incorrect. And averagely, most humans are 50% across the board on those stats. So we are highly suspicious, highly autonomous people that really don't like being wrong. And if you stand back and look at that, you then start to think, okay, given that, and I hold my hands up to me being that person too. I'm not saying it's everybody else and I'm perfect. I actually think that's quite a nice personality to have. But that's where we stand, which means that the first thing you do in changing lawyers, in our experience, is you have to explain to them why we need to change, and then how we change. And with all humans, not just lawyers, you make it simple and easy. You don't add to anybody's workload. They are stressed. They are time poor, massively time poor, and they are dealing with humans who in themselves as a consumer are very anxious. They want their house. They don't want, there's a whole lot of emotions that go down in conveyancing as well.
One of the most stressful things, isn't it? Everyone knows that.
Exactly. So what you have to do is understand the people that you're changing, asking to change rather, and then you give it to them why, because we are deeply suspicious, highly autonomous beasts, and then you make it really, really simple for them, basically, so that they can do that step change with no extra burden on them.
Okay. So in relation to this particular problem, providing a TA6 to the agents up front, how do we make that simple?
This is not actually rehearsed in any way, shape, sense or form. But when I was looking at this, when we were looking at this as the CS partnership, that's why we are talking now, you and I, because my answer to this is use Minerva. I say that to clients.
Thank you. You didn't have to say that. Other products are available, but not the ones that I want you to use.
Yeah, I know that, but here's the reason. You're already out there talking to agents as a product. The lawyers can already deal with that very simply. They can split out the forms, parts 1 and 2, if that was required. I'm sure that will come if it's not already there. It's very simple. It's on a portal. It's not the whole thing.
And we're digitally filling the forms in, so that the client, if you don't realise this, we are filling these forms in electronically. Doesn't look like a 36-page form anymore. It's not quite as daunting. We can give that data to the estate agent on day one, or when I say we, you, the lawyer, can give that data to the people on day one, and the agents think it's great. We've got a fantastic example of this running in Hull at the moment, where every house that goes on the market by a particular agent in Hull is getting a PIQ that will just turn that into a TA6 on day one.
Yeah.
And it's simple.
Make it simple.
It really is quite simple. This is not as big a trauma. And if the client needs a little bit of help filling the form in, they ring the lawyer up. The lawyer gives them a little bit of guidance on what to do, which tends to be just rereading the notes back to the customer that's in the guidance notes, to be truthful. But yeah, there are some areas where they need.
So far, it might be more than that with this new form, actually, because there's some areas that need help. But yes. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I would do. Make it simple.
Okay. So we've done 40 minutes, Sarah. Have you got any? Is there any area of this that we haven't covered that you would like to have a look at? Or
one very quick thing I will say is that we've put the 25th of June on that, as we've said, referenced already, and that's because if a firm is CQS accredited, they need to be using this new form by that date at the latest.
Yes, the latest, not the earliest. It's the latest.
No, the latest. Yeah. There's some noise in on the social media about the fact that, well, we just won't bother with that, and what no need to do it and no need to comply. And here's something I will really say. As a profession, I don't think we can be up in arms about something like the post office scandal or Axiom Inc scandal or any of, all of the bad actors that we see more and more or seem to hear more and more about, and say, well, that's very bad behaviour, but I personally am holier than thou, and yet I'm still not going to comply with the accreditations that I've got. Because back to your reference about cars, if I bought a car from a mechanic, from a garage, and they were, say, CQS accredited, and then I later found out that they were CQS accredited, but they didn't take it too seriously, and they didn't do the particular bit that they didn't like very much because it caused them
the 240-point RAC check, is that what you mean?
I would be up in arms about that kind of stuff. So I don't think we can't honourably say that we're going to behave honourably and not be accredited properly and not take it seriously. But it's more even than this point of honesty, which is if you lose your CQS accreditation, you cannot act for any of the lenders. And if you do that, or if you lose your CQS accreditation, you're going to be responsible for answering to your professional indemnity insurers. And so consequently, you're going to have trouble paying your staff, and you're going to have trouble paying your rent, and you're just not going to have a business anymore. And this isn't, I know I'm sounding like Nanny McPhee. I do tend to do that to lawyers, but it's a big deal. It's something to take seriously. I'm not saying we don't need some clarification around the elements we've already talked about. We do. And everybody's voice matters, and everybody should be writing to the Law Society to ask for that. Without a shadow of a doubt, we need some proper help about what it means to the lawyers and how we go about doing it. That's fine. But to sit and say, I'm not going to do something because I don't like that element is childish at best. And no, not good. Sorry.
Okay.
You did set me off, but at least you set me off right at the end.
Okay. And I'm trying to tread a middle ground here.
Absolutely.
In terms of, clearly, it's not for everybody upfront information, and there are some very vociferous views. But equally, for those who want to adopt it, want to grab it, and some firms out there will be absolutely out on the streets talking to estate agents saying, we can do it, we can help, as will our panel manager friends. And therefore, what do? Do you sit back and wait, law firms, or do you grab it, start going out there, start adopting onboarding technologies that are onboarding for you and onboarding for the estate agent at the same time, giving a consumer a better experience and making this work for you, and actually making this into a really big opportunity. That's my thing. All right, definitely. Sarah, we've done 45 minutes. You've been brilliant, as usual. I hope you'll come back. Will you come back another time?
100% come back.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for listening today. I'm going to get back out into this Yorkshire sunshine, and I wish you all a very good weekend. Cheers. Bye-bye.